What's up? What's up? What's up? This is your girl, Yuta K Best, and you are listening to Hella Random Radio, where positive energy lives. Today, my guest is the beautiful, the amazing, the wonderful relationship coach, Miss Fila Antwine. How are you doing today, beautiful?
I am doing amazing, sis. I'm happy to be here, excited for this conversation, and just leaning into whatever is going to be.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much. I'm super excited. I felt, I've worked with you before. I took one of Fila's 6 weeks courses, and it was really helpful at a time when I unconsciously um, was taking a retreat, and so it was really the perfect time to internalize, process, and really embody the information. Because what I'm learning as a life coach is that people's environment is very important. And if you're stuck with a bunch of people who want to keep you the old way, it can be hard to shift. So it's just everything was in alignment. The course was really wonderful. And yeah, so I always knew that this would be a fairly inspirational and easy conversation, but she has made it even easier by making a lot of talks and offering a lot of information about, you know, women needing to heal like a toxic mother wound. Um, so yeah, if you don't mind, if you want to go ahead and maybe give a short introduction, shout out whatever else that you would like to shout out, and then, talk to us about this mother wound and why this is coming up for you right now.
Absolutely. So, first of all, thank you again for having me.
Of
I
course.
am appreciative and grateful for you to just share your space. My name is Fila Antwine. I am a life and relationship coach for bold Black women and powerful women of color. At the foundation of all of my coaching programs, it is about trauma resolution because I myself am a trauma survivor. And in going through my own experiences in my own life, I became hyper aware of how the trauma that I experienced in childhood was impacting my adult choices and my adult experiences. And so, as a life and relationship coach, I come with that trauma informed perspective, and I help my clients to resolve any trauma, any negative emotional residue that's present that actually is blocking them from creating the things that they want to create in life. And those mother wounds are a big deal. And because I focus on working with Black women and with women of color, we don't often get the opportunity to hold our mothers accountable. So, this is a conversation that we don't have as often as we need to. We hear about the daddy issues, we hear about absenteeism with fathers, but because our mothers primarily were there, even if they were there and they were toxic, we're taught to just respect them, right? We're taught to minimize our own emotional needs and feelings when it comes to the relationship dynamic we've had with our mothers. And so I am aiming to remove that stigma and really begin to clear up some of that residue and that clutter and allow daughters to begin healing themselves, which ultimately becomes a healing mechanism for the mothers as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's really deep stuff, and I know it all to be true. Um, but it also can be a very triggering conversation. Like, yes, I know what it is, but I love my mom so much, even, with the things that I've been through. And so I flinch a little bit, with the phrase toxic mother, and I'm just compelled to be like, yeah, she was toxic, but she was doing the best that she can, and make all of these other excuses. And so I think that I know that it's your work, and that you have to tackle the tough conversations. But it's really interesting to me. I'm super surprised by how triggered I personally am, given all of the work that I've done, to just those two words have a trigger response. Have you had anybody like push back on that phrase, or?
I haven't necessarily had anyone push back. I know that that is because the women who come into my space to work with me have already reached a certain level of self awareness and have a certain level of openness. So similar to what you're experiencing now, I have had clients feel the same way, where they are just made aware of certain feelings of resistance that they didn't know were there. And so those are conversations that we have, right? And here's something that's really important that I want to point out. You can have a good mother who potentially exhibited some toxic behavioral patterns
Absolutely.
at times.
Right.
We're talking about consistency of pattern here, consistency of behavior, consistency of dynamic, right? And it's funny because my mom, from time to time, will pop in on one of my lives or check out something that I'm doing. And she DM'd me the other day and she's like, oh, I saw you were doing some stuff about toxic mothers. So I popped in to see if I heard my name, you know?
Just checking.
Just checking, right? And my mother was a teenage mom. She was 17 when she had me. So we grew up together in some ways. So of course there were some toxic patterns, some toxic behaviors that were exhibited, but the goal is always to grow through these things and become better. You know, so I had to say, Mom, you're a good mom. I said, you know, you got some toxic things that have happened. Who doesn't? Because I want us, let's be in our humanity as well. And recognize that any of us can exhibit a toxic behavior or have a toxic pattern, but you evaluate that and resolve that. That doesn't make you a toxic person. It simply makes you someone who has a pattern of behavior that's not in alignment with what you want to create, and you get to change it.
Right, exactly. You know, and in my work, which is all, you know, directly related to the unconscious mind, I've just become very clear that as hard as life itself is, a lot of the real challenging work is ancestral. You know, we're born with programs, you know, and so that toxicity is not, if ever, you know, really a person's fault, you know, until they recognize it and decide not to do something about it, you know. So yeah, definitely it is easy and likely, you know, really to have some sort of a toxic pattern that needs to be shifted, in my opinion. If there's anything in your life that is different from the way that you want it to be, it's because there's an unconscious pattern that needs to be shifted, you know. So it's not personal, but those triggers are real.
They are real. They absolutely are. And there can even be dynamics where a mother's patterns are toxic with good intentions, right? So this is not about demonizing anyone. It's about the awareness, like you said, of what is unconscious. There's so many mothers who overcompensate with their children for feelings of lack that they have, and then unfortunately cripple their children or hinder their children in some way because they created a toxic cycle of behavior. Was that their intention? No. So it's not about self-judgment here. It's about self-awareness for the mothers and for the daughters and the children in general.
Ashe, ashe, ashe. And so I am going to go ahead and step back a little bit. And I happen to know that you once had a corporate job, you know, and you had to let go of that to chase more of what you love. Can you tell us a little bit of that story?
So I have always been a girl who would quit a job. And you know, my friends, my closest girlfriends, they're brilliant. They're all college educated, master's degrees, beautiful, powerful women. And I would be the one who would be like, oh no, I didn't go back today. And they would like, huh? Like, wait, what? Again, it just didn't feel right. It didn't feel right to me, right? It didn't light my soul up. And this was before that kind of talk was popular. Especially within communities of color. And so I was always kind of seen as like the emotional weirdo of my friend circle and of my group, and overly emotional. You're too emotional. You put too much emphasis on how you feel. You're a crybaby, all of those things. And so I was working in administration for the MTA in New York City. It was an extremely stressful job, stressful position. I had recently given birth to my first son, and here we are in motherhood, right? I'm in motherhood for the first time. So the feelings of personal dissatisfaction that I may have had before becoming a mother were exacerbated by the fact that now I was responsible for mothering a child, another human being. And the primary reason that caused me to step away and to really look at all of my unconscious actions was because I began to see how ridiculous all of our social patterns were, right?
Mm,
Starting with the fact that I'm working in a job that I don't like, in an environment that's making me feel sick, and everyone feels the same way, but it's just our norm. That was number
yeah.
one. Now I'm realizing, as a mother at that time, I am going to work to make money for someone else to take care of the child that I just had. So I'm leaving him in order to send him to someone else, and now I have to pay for that. And it was mind-blowing to me, right? That this was the way that we've always done things, that this is the normal dynamic. And I'm going to be honest with you, Yuta, before I became a mother, I was oblivious. I was
Mm,
oblivious. I was just operating unconsciously. And this is the nature of things. Early on in my collegiate experience, I'm a like 4-time college dropout. I tried it and tried it again and tried it again. Eventually it was like, sis, this ain't for you. Okay. And I was pre-law when I was in college. So there was a point where I believed that being an attorney was going to be like the best thing ever, create the best life for me. I was going to go into corporate law. I was on the law team in high school. All of my professors told me I would be great. And I had a moment of self-awareness where I realized at maybe 20 or 20, maybe 19 or 20, I don't really want to do this.
mm,
And so that was like my first experience there. So by the time I was working in this job and had my son, I was already self-aware to a point where I felt confident enough in spirit, in nature, in life, in myself, that if I made the decisions that were closest to my heart, I would always be led to where I needed to be.
yeah.
And I remember having a conversation with a coworker and mentioning that I was going to leave because there were, other things I wanted to do. And she said to me, now I was in my 20s at the time. This was a woman in her 40s. I'm in my 40s now.
Yeah.
She said to me, you can do all of the things that you want to do when you retire.
Oh my
Don't do
goodness.
them now. Wait until you retire so that you're vested. And so she thought she was giving me good information and good
That was
advice.
her unconscious program.
Absolutely. And I was fucking flabbergasted. Like, wait till I retire. What? But that was when I realized, like, oh, we really are living in the matrix.
In the Matrix.
And
Yes,
some
that is
folks are
so
agents.
wild. And I know she probably just had the angelic aura and just like, let me drop some gems on this young
Yes.
lady. Like, woo. But yeah, and it's really interesting that you talk about like being the weirdo or being overly emotional, because I would imagine that is actually a gift, and that many of those friends who talked about that now see what a blessing and a gift that was, and how you were, ahead of the curve to
Mm-hmm.
where I think we're all trying to get there now, back to feeling our emotions and letting our emotions be a guide and all that. So yes, thank you for being you.
No,
Um,
absolutely. Absolutely.
so I mean, obviously you are a Black woman, but I am interested in why you have chosen to work almost primarily with Black women.
Mm-hmm. So that is a question that I get quite often, generally from non-Black women. So I appreciate you asking me, right? So that we can have the conversation.
Yeah.
Because I want the women that I work with and women who potentially desire to work with me to know. So I have worked with all types of women, Black women, brown women, white women, Asian women in all walks of life. Everyone is welcomed here, but this is a house built by a Black woman, specifically for the needs of Black women and women of color. And the reason for that is because when I began my own personal healing journey, I could not find anyone in the space who was a wellness practitioner or a therapist or a light bearer or healer who looked like me and understood where I was coming from in a way that I didn't constantly have to explain things.
Wow. And about what year were you really getting started or on that search?
So this was probably about, my son was born in 2005. I want to say it was probably between 2007 and 2010.
Wow.
So maybe 13 to 15 years ago. And I'm a New Yorker, so I'm in New York, where we have access to
Yes.
everything and everyone.
Right.
Right. When it came to seeking healing in the way that felt aligned with me, it was about more than just talk therapy.
Yeah.
It was about merging the spiritual, the emotional, the mental, excuse me, for me. And the only people that I could find who were in that realm were white women. And I am all about the truth and the transparency, right?
Right.
In so many of those places and spaces, I felt the lack of sauce. I felt, right, spice.
Yeah.
There were so many times where this information was familiar to me. And let me step back and just say, I'm named after my maternal grandmother.
Okay.
So she was a Southern woman from South Carolina, sharecropper, picked cotton, saw spirits, could tell you things, all of that.
Right.
So that's a part of who I am, spiritually, energetically, and in my human form. And so I would go into environments where there were women who were doing their best to share, and it just did not feel authentic to me. And I felt like there was something missing.
Yeah.
I can give you a recipe, right? But if cooking is not your gift, there's going to be something that's missing from it. And so I always had that feeling. And when I tell you, I tried to stay in the spaces, but there was just something missing. There was a level of soul that was not there. And this is not to demonize any of the women in those spaces. It simply I didn't respond to it. And so as I began to do my work and, seek out things that I could do on myself, and I've done all types of personal development workshops and all kinds of things, I realized if I feel like this, there may be other women in the space who feel like this too.
Yeah.
And so I said, I'm going to focus on us. And I also made that decision because I believe that Black women have a special layering of trauma that's not just personal, that's not just generational, that's not just cultural, but it's also socially impacted. So we experience the deepest level of social conditioning, programming, and trauma. And then we have our personal shit to deal with.
Right.
So for me, in healing Black women and helping Black women to heal, I believe that I'm actually creating a space of healing for all women, because everything that we've been through allows us to be a stand for the things that other women are going through as well.
Ashe, Ashe. That's wonderful. So what was like the first course or modality, that you took to begin your journey as a coach?
So I remember having my first therapy session, and it was with a white male therapist. And the entire time I was in the space, right. The entire time I was in the space, I was like, what am I doing here? What am I doing here? So that was, I think that experience kind of set me on the path. As I just became more self-aware, I recognized that this was something I wanted to offer and something I wanted to share. I didn't necessarily know that I was going to be a coach, though. I started out speaking. I would reach out to schools and I would reach out to organizations where my ideal audience was. And I just began to share my own personal journey. And what happened was I would have women reaching out to me in those spaces, asking me if I offered therapeutic services or counseling services or life coaching services. And I was kind of like, no, I don't. And it got to a point where I was like, okay, I think this is the direction that I need to move in. So I didn't take any official course or any official class initially to get me started. It
Got you.
really was this organic growth that came from women saying, I've never felt the level of trust that I feel with you. I've never felt the
Nice.
level of comfort that I feel with you. I've never shared the things that I'm willing to share with you. And that really was what set me out on that path. And then I just began to share. We were in the age of the social media boom, and I began to share and position myself in that space, and everything grew from there.
Nice, nice. I mean, and to speak a little bit to that story, I remember you made a post once way back, I think when I was working with you, about how in the beginning of your relationship with your husband that y'all would like break up once a week or something like that.
Girl, yes.
Can
And it
you
was
tell us
all
about
me.
that and why you think that was a thing?
It's funny because my husband always, he even tells my kids, he's like, because she was a runner, right? And my husband comes from a 2-parent household, the only man I've ever dated who had his father in his life.
Wow.
So that tells you about me,
Congrats.
right? That
Right.
tells you about me and where I
Yeah.
come from.
Right.
And so I was afraid of yielding. I was afraid of not fighting against someone. And it conflicted with everything that I had told myself about men, about relationships, about all of those things. And I remember seeing my mother-in-law when I first started dating my husband. She served my father-in-law. Like, she brought him his plate and sat it down for him. And I was like, what the hell is going on over here?
She was like, is this Stepford? What's happening?
Exactly. Like, what is this? What is happening? It was so out of my paradigm because I come from a beautiful, strong mother who is
Yeah.
one of 11 children, and there were 8 girls, and they were powerful and strong, and always reminded us that you don't need no man in your life. And one of the things that you don't do is give up your power to a man, even though they were all married to men who were habitual liars, habitual cheaters, drug abusers, physical abusers, and all the things. So
Wow.
there's so much conflict there. So the long and short is that my husband and I simply came from different relationship paradigms, and that conflicted. And anytime I was challenged with my own idea of having to let go of my own independence, my own ideas of relationships, it caused me to simply run away. And I didn't
Yeah.
want to deal with myself. I didn't want to hold myself accountable. And it was really like, well, I don't need him, so I can move on and I can move forward. But he didn't leave
Yeah.
initially, right? Like and I actually have to say also that I had an extremely spiritual connection with him. Everything about the way that we came together and all of that. And so there was that aspect that held me there, but there was my fear and my trauma and my unconscious patterns that were like, run away, run away, run away, right? Because internally, my higher self knew this is going to cause you to grow.
Yeah. Yeah. And I tell people all the time, like your spirit, your higher self is not super worried about your romantic life. It wants you to spiritually actualize and become whole. That's really dope. You know, kudos, kudos, kudos. Shout out to him, and congratulations that you were able to make that connection. So so he didn't leave. But how did you recognize, did you just kind of give in over time because he was just always there and it softened you? Or did you actually recognize the pattern and start working on it?
So initially, my first response was to leave, to run, right? He was stable and strong and there and held me accountable to that. But when he recognized that this was an ongoing pattern, he stopped my ability to do that at some point in saying, okay, well, then if this is not something that you're able to stay and work for, then I'm not going to be available anymore. Yes. That was
Yes.
like, wait a
We don't
minute,
know
what?
what we got till it's gone.
Right. Like, because we are so unconscious that even in my, well, I'm going to leave, I don't really mean I'm going to leave, right? What I mean is I'm afraid to stay. That's what I'm saying. I'm afraid to stay. I'm afraid to uncover my, afraid to do this, and I don't want to do it alone, right? Will you actually be here? That's the conversation that's actually happening, but
Right.
I'm so unconscious, it's just, I'm going to go. Once I was faced with the possibility that, oh, I would no longer have access to him, because again, my spiritual self, my sacred self knew that this was the connection I needed to grow in so many ways.
Wow.
So it made me become conscious of the unconscious pattern of behavior I had been operating in. And we began to have tough conversations, real conversations. And it is incredible because I credit my husband with teaching me how to be a wife.
Wow.
I had no idea
awesome.
what that looked like before.
Yeah.
And I was raised by a mother who was a wife, but a wife to a serial cheater, right? A serial liar, a serial, all the things. So in that, she never was really able to decide what kind of wife and partner she wanted to be. She was always in self-protection mode.
Right.
And so my husband was really able to teach me what it meant to partner, what it meant to be in partnership, what it meant to give in and to submit to something outside of yourself.
Yeah.
So being faced with the idea that I might lose the possibility to create the thing I really want to create, because I don't believe that there's anything I've ever wanted more in my life than love and healthy partnership. That's so important to me.
Right.
And so when being faced with the possibility that that would be taken away, I got my shit together. Or at least I tried to start getting it together. And it was it's been a journey, it's been a road, but it has absolutely been the most powerful thing in my entire life.
So I think you mentioned or shared that y'all were together maybe at least like 5 years before you got married.
Yes. We got married in 2010 and we were together. So we were together, I think about 5 or 6 years we were together.
Okay. I mean, and do you feel like you've got married because you worked through a lot of these things and the relationship was more safe, or were there still like some things that that of course there's always things to be learned, but what do you think, was the straw that was like, okay, let's go ahead and get married?
So there were periods where, okay, so here's the thing, right? So many of us as women want to be married because of the idea of marriage. But again, we don't necessarily want to be a partner. We don't know how to be a partner. We're not looking for a partnership. And so I wanted love and partnership somewhere, right? But I also wanted to be married because now we're in a relationship. We're actually coming up in like a month. We're coming up on us, like the 20-year anniversary of us meeting. So we've been together for almost 20 years. We met. We started dating a few months later. About a year and a half after, we had our son. So we had our child before we were married or any of those things. And when I was pregnant with my son, my mother-in-law, who is more old school and who was older than my mother, reached out and wanted to have a conversation about whether or not we should talk about marriage. And I said, I'm not marrying him just because I'm pregnant.
I had that same reaction.
And that was immediate. There was no thought about how this could be beneficial. But because I come from a teenage mom, they got married later. I come from an environment where you this can be your baby father and you don't have to get married, or maybe you can, or whatever. And so it was immediately like, I'm not marrying him because I'm pregnant. And so there became resistance to marriage immediately, because I did not want to be a woman who felt like she needed to marry a man because she was having a child. Even though in having a child needs a support system, a child
Right.
needs a village. But that was not the mentality that I was operating from at the time. So
Right.
we stayed in our relationship, and there was a time where we began to talk about marriage, and I wanted to get married until my now husband, who was my baby father at the time, right, with a V, father,
Right.
said to me, let's do it, in conversation about marriage. And I was like, I think we should get married now. It's time. We have bought a condo together and we were living together. And maybe that was like, maybe we were together for like 2 years or 2.5 years at that time. And he said, like, I think you're right. Let's do it. And the fear and resistance that came up in me, I had no idea it was there.
Wow. Phase
No
two.
idea. It was like,
Wow.
I'm the one having the conversation. I'm the one
Right.
initiating the conversation about, don't you think that it's time, and blah, blah, blah. But because, again, I was so used to the dysfunctional dynamic of men and women, I'm always expecting him and I to be at odds. I'm
Yeah.
always expecting him to have resistance of what position I was in. And when he was open to it, I completely shut down and closed and did not have that conversation again. So then when I revisited the conversation a few months later, he now had his own personal fears and resistance, because
Oh
what's
man.
happening here,
Right.
right? What's happening here? And so it did allow us to take time to work through the things that we needed to. And by the time we got to engagement and married, we were two totally different people living a totally different life. Our married selves have never had any significant or severe issues. I never had nobody calling me, telling me where my baby father was, or my boyfriend, or anything like that in marriage. So by the time we decided to do it, we were totally and completely ready. And we have both evolved. However, I want to be super clear that we both have done individual work, spiritual
Yeah.
work. We've done, personal development workshops independently and together. We've had spiritual coaches independently and together. My husband has had his own spiritual teachers and all of those things. And so we were both doing the work individually, which allowed us to do it collectively.
Nice. Nice. Yeah. And that's kind of, so when you brought it up and you had that reaction, were you self-aware right away, or, you know,
Immediately. I was self-aware immediately, because, we have you starting to do the work. I just was not aware that that fear was there. And
mm,
when he was open and he received it, it immediately showed up, and I was immediately self-aware. And I should be transparent in saying that I experienced extreme trauma in my own parents' relationships. I was sexually abused by my biological father. And so there were so
mm,
many things there that I had not dug deep enough yet to really uncover that they were still present. And that was the start of me realizing that those things needed to be dealt with as well. So that fear and that resistance wasn't about him. It wasn't necessarily about us. It was about all my unresolved stuff.
right. I mean, and what tools did you have to begin to address that at that
Mm-hmm.
time?
At the time, so again, I've always had a spiritual awareness
Fair.
from childhood,
Okay.
which is part of what made me like the weirdo all the time. So there's always been a self-awareness. I had an extremely close relationship with my grandmother, and we would have conversations, and she would share stories, and she
Got
talked to
you.
me about her gift and the ability and how to tap in and how to tune in and how to ask yourself questions. And, she did the tea
Nice.
reading and all the things like that as well. So that was a part of my foundation. My mother is a nurse. She's always been a nurse my entire life. and she has always worked in alternative and holistic medicine. So that
Nice.
aspect of holistic healing has also always been there as well. And then at that time, I had simply started on like the self-help journey. So I was reading a lot of books, trying to discover some things. And we are New Yorkers natively. We spent a lot of time in Harlem. At that time, you could go to Harlem and there were spiritual conferences and there were spiritual
Nice.
conversations happening on the corners. And so we were in this bubble, in this environment where we had so much access to so many modalities of healing that were kind of just showing up in our lives and in our space at that time. And then after that is when I stepped into more curated healing spaces.
Nice, nice, nice. Awesome. Like, yes, it's wonderful that I don't know, it just sounds like your journey, it was really, I don't know, I guess I'm finding the more that I do this work, I've always been very much like, even when I was in college, completely left brain. I also got a minor in philosophy, and that's kind of where I started to open up. But that philosophical stuff had me really believing more in free will. But now, the more that I do this work and I'm in the field and in people's, unconscious so much, that I'm really beginning to see that there's some interesting paradox of free will and just predestination, and things just being what they were meant to be when they were meant to be that way. So anyway, that's just a random thing that I wasn't necessarily expecting to get out of this conversation. So
No, but
thank
I don't think
you.
it's random. I don't think it's random at all. I think it's so aligned with what we're talking about it and what we're saying. And in my own experience as well, I had to have a reevaluation of like my principles in that same way. And I do believe that we are here of our own free will, but I also believe that we have made decisions for ourselves prior to being here in this space. And so things are always working to make sure that we get to fulfill our promise to ourselves, our purpose to each other, and all that kind of stuff. And who knows, in 15 minutes, we might have some more realizations, right?
Right. I feel like I'm gonna be channeling some aliens here in not too long.
Right.
I hope I have some friends left. No. Anyway, I do want to go ahead and shift now. Thank you so much. But you have a very successful business. And we talked a little bit about, I'm sure you were doing a lot of the coaching and stuff that I was doing, and you hear, okay, now it's time to expand. It's time to figure out how to group coach. It's time to get some employees and all that. And you were telling me that you did have employees at one point, but you decided to scale back. Can you talk a little bit about that decision and why you're not going for the absolute most possible?
Absolutely. So success is such a paradox. And the idea of success, we often streamline it into this funnel that's based on a very limited amount of information and limited experiences of other people. So when it comes to having a business, I do believe I have a successful coaching practice, right? Number one, it makes positive impact on my clients. So I'm positively impacting the lives of others. When we're talking about income and, everybody's like, oh, I want to have a 6-figure business. In that respect is successful as well. What you learn when you get to 6 figures is that it really ain't no money because you're paying for everything on your own, and taxes take this and take that and all that. And then it's, well, you want to have a team. And I've been in the space of having the team as well, because that's what I was told. That's what I learned based on the coaches I worked with in the business space, based on the masterminds that I was in. And that information is helpful and useful and beneficial. However, Yuda, it did not feel right for me. It didn't feel aligned for me at the time. That doesn't mean that in a year or 5 years, that may not change. But in doing this expansion in my business, and I've paid tens of thousands of dollars to be in programs, to work with coaches, because I want to be the best at what I'm doing, right? And The technical aspect, the business aspect, that's not my ministry. That ain't my ministry. So I need help.
Yes, yes.
And so I've gotten the help. But in doing that, often what we uncover is what we don't want before we get to what we do want. And I learned that what I don't want to be a CEO who's tied to a desk who has to manage 150 people. I don't want that.
Right.
That's not what works for me. So I scaled back, and I'm currently at the solopreneur stage again. And what I do instead is that I contract some of the people who were a part of my team. Instead of having employees on board and all that, I work with contractors, and we have amazing relationships. I have someone who works on my marketing, my operations, video and audio, excuse me, video and audio. And that works for me, right?
Yeah.
And I get to stay in my space in the way that I need to. At this point, I am looking to hire a business manager or an assistant, but I think that would be it. And so we get such redundant rhetoric around how to run a business and how to be successful at a business and how to scale a business. And it works if you want a specific type of business and if you're a specific type of person. But what I know from being a woman, from being in spaces with other women business owners, is that for most women, the experience that you are having personally impacts the experience you will have in your business. And if you are overwhelmed and overworked and overbooked and even making the money that you want to make, but you're not nourishing yourself and nurturing your soul and practicing self-care, the business is going to implode at some point.
Right.
And I saw so many women who were making the money that I thought I wanted to make, who had the success I thought I wanted to have, who were, having $100,000 months and making millions a year. But then in the conversations within the inner circle, it was like, my marriage is falling apart. My children are telling any time with them. I'm so overwhelmed and I'm so exhausted and I'm so tired, or I'm so overweight and I have these health problems now. There was this disconnect internally and emotionally that called me to task to really become aware of whether or not this was the environment that I wanted to be in. Back to what you started about being in the environment, right? And an environment may seem successful on one end, but not be aligned with you on another end. And so that's the place and space that I found myself in, that I'm still in now, even while coaching clients and having amazing results for them. And I believe that I'm always going to be in a process of figuring things out, because that's the nature of life. And I allow myself that honesty as a professional, as a business owner, as a coach as well, without letting it minimize my professionalism or my gift or my services in any way.
Yeah. So, I mean, and I feel like another way to say that is that success has to be really personal. And we really need to stop looking. I mean, get all the information that you can get to do the things that you think you want to do, but also, define these things for yourself instead of letting other people tell you what it is to be successful.
Yeah.
It's really interesting because I was in a mastermind last week, and she was sick, but she had to show up. And to me, all of those kind of things are like a cautionary tale. It's like, yes, I would like to have more money, but also at what cost?
Absolutely.
So I definitely am easy ahead and not rushing into some stuff that I'm then later not comfortable putting down or letting go, that my ego has become attached to it or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's important for us to, as we grow in all spaces, but in a business capacity, I'm learning I get to have the success in the way that it resonates with me, whether that's financially or real estate or other ways. But I also get to become aware that the things that I want to come along with that are ease, our peace, our joy, our enjoyment, right? And not carrying on the idea that I have to break my back in order to be successful. I have to self-sacrifice or overextend. So it's about finding that balance in that place and space. And also, it is super important for me to be a present mom. You asked me what started me in this place to even leave a job. It was motherhood. So
Right.
being a present mom is still important to me. My oldest just started college this year. My youngest is in junior high. She's homeschooled. So being present for them is important. And there are other people who are having levels of success that are astronomical, but they don't have my lifestyle.
Right. Right, right. And I mean, you led into it and touched on, what I'm imagining is going to be my last question, which is, on one hand, I think we have people that are still attached to the old capitalistic system that are just trying to get as much money as possible. But there's a whole nother segment of people who I would call more awake, who are talking about rest and ease and all of these things. And can you talk about why maybe you think that that's becoming more of a part of the conversation? And what is important there for you as far as ease and rest and all of that?
So I think that this connects to our entire conversation on so many levels, right? So one of the reasons is simply that there is a spiritual and an energetic shift that is occurring, that has been occurring, that's allowing us to tap into a new awareness.
Yeah.
And collectively, we have recognized that the old ways get to die and new things get to be birthed and to be born, right? On another level, when we're talking about culturally and specifically with Black and Brown women, which is who I focus on working with, we are a part of that shift. And what we have recognized is that our patterns of behavior were rooted in trauma, we're rooted in oppression, right? We're rooted in racism. And when we previously, our mothers and grandmothers and their mothers previously didn't have the ability to simply say to themselves, I don't feel well, right? Or I'm tired, or to even ask themselves, how do I feel? That it now becomes our responsibility to offer healing to our lineage and hope for our progeny to be able to take on the tasks of giving ourselves more care, more love, more rest. And once we start to do that, I think we become aware of the benefits and it makes you want to do it again. And then I also think it's because enough of us have gotten a peek at success, right? I have air quotes.
Yes.
Enough of us have gotten a peek at it to know, oh, this is not what I signed up for. I don't really know if I want this.
Yeah.
So I think there are more conversations happening about what goes on behind the curtains, because for so long, success was only offered to, white, Anglo, heterosexual males who kept what really happened amongst themselves. And so we only got to see what they showed us. And we wanted those things because those things were positioned as the ideal, as the dream of what life should be. And now those of us outside in, so-called marginalized communities have gotten to be able to sneak a peek behind the curtain. And we're like, oh, we don't even want this shit. You can have it. And now, and we're trying to get back to something else. And in doing that, we're also coming back into alignment with our ancestral selves and getting back to ancestral practices when it comes to nutrition, when it comes to health, when it comes to wellness, when it comes to life. And all of those aspects, I believe, are fueling our desire to kind of get back to basics. Because sis, let me tell you, I dream about living on a homestead and a family compound. And I want some luxury in there too, but like having a farm and all of these things. And I'm a New Yorker born and raised. I never could have imagined that I would even want to live the life that I dream about living now. Like, who wants to farm and pick me? I do. I want to do that.
That's part of why I'm going to South Carolina next month to go keep game and see, where we might be able to get some land. But yeah, I definitely want to add a little bit to what you're saying about, them showing us this ideal that's not really idealist, that's not really to be had. I'm very, very grateful that I did go to corporate and make a lot of money and recognize that it does not bring happiness. Because I know so many people that are still convinced that should they acquire X amount of dollars, they're automatically going to be happy, you know, and you can't, it's really hard to convince someone otherwise until they get to that point. So, whew, that's some
I
deep stuff.
agree.
Awesome. So this has been a really wonderful conversation. I think there's been a lot of gems shared here. Is there any one last thing, like you want to shout out the business or just anything in particular that you would like to share with anyone who might be listening?
So, we've touched on so many things. I think that the one thing that I want to share to kind of just bring everything together is that you get to create the life and lifestyle that is best suited for who you want to become. And it doesn't have to be perfect. And there can be bumps along the way, and you can be your imperfect self. You can be flawed. You can have toxic patterns, right? You can come from trauma, but still want what you want. And simply having that desire is an indication that it's available to you. So it's all about having putting one foot in front of the other, allowing yourself to take steps, even if those steps lead to what may feel like failure. That is really where we gain the knowledge and the insight and the awareness. And so if anyone is listening and is in need of support with that, with creating a life of healing, happiness, and wholeness, I would invite you to come and join me inside of Sacred Queen Academy, which is my signature coaching program. This is airing in fall, so I have a fall session that opens. And if there's any other information that they'd like to learn about me or have any questions or just want to connect with me, you can find me on my website at filaantwine.com or on Instagram or TikTok at She Is Fila.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you so much for this
My pleasure.
conversation. Awesome. This has been Hella Random Radio, where positive energy lives. Please like, share, subscribe, comment, all the things. And I hope to see you here again soon. Peace.